What's up, BTS? It's your host, Michaela, and I'm here to break down the top 10 celebrities who should have never started their podcasts. But before we jump into the countdown, tell me in the comments below, do you like listening to podcasts? At number 10, we have what has been deemed as one of the most bland podcasts in celebrity history, and that is Renegades. It's true that Bruce Springsteen has always been one to tell a good story, however, some are utterly bored by his most recent Spotify-hosted chapter. The setup of two guys just talking about hope is almost ironic, given the practically opposite titled podcast of Renegades Born in the USA that Bruce co-hosts with former US President Barack Obama. In it, they talk about themes ranging from the American dream, racing, and money through 8 40-minute to 1 hour long shows. In all honesty, the name should have stuck with something more fitting, like Obama's striking near parting quote on the final episode, which reads, "I'm the hope guy." However, diving into issues such as police brutality and Trump's presidency without sparking any anger or mass outrage is also understandably why the name has been finalized as such. Still, one fan referred to the podcast with, "Just found out Obama has a podcast with Bruce Springsteen and I'm officially at my limit. I refuse to take in any more new information from this point on." At number 9, we have Rob Lowe and his Literally podcast. The Conan O'Brien Network hosted show has been repeatedly bashed over its lengthy and tedious games of Remember When, with famous stars like Chris Pratt and Gwyneth Paltrow. In short, it has been heavily referred to as mind-numbingly boring. During September 2021 though, Rob seen more of a positive view for his former podcast called Parks and Recollection, which served as an insider viewpoint to the makings of the Park and Recreation series. While the latter has been a hit, Literally has received mixed reviews, and looking back on Rob's past could very well be the reason why so many people think his latter podcast is not needed. Things like silencing his previous employees with a court case, to getting involved in a fight with Tom Cruise during filming for The Outsiders, dealing with easy access drugs and alcohol, and sleeping with a minor with an eventual tape being released. And although Rob was unknowing of the final issue at the time, all these things racked up surely does not look too good on him as a podcast host. At number 8, we have Adam Devine, who was brutally criticized on Twitter for things he mentioned regarding podcasts. According to Adam, podcasts are much easier to do than the acting he does in front of cameras, which was said during a This Is Important sit-down. He was later blasted for expanding on this topic to Vanity Fair with a rather dismissive attitude. Adam's comments were swooped up by the New York Times to counter his claims, and later called out again by the Cut podcaster Avery Trufelman. She deemed Adam's words as a slap in the face, later clarifying that she was not upset with him. However, numerous fans had already agreed with Avery's since deleted tweet, all understanding how much creativity and craft goes into making podcasts enjoyable. Since Avery has carried out 3 of her own podcasts, known currently as The Cut, 99% Invisible, and host of Curb's own Nice Try. At number 7, we have comedian Katherine Ryan, who is surely loved and adored by many. But one single comment about men seems to have turned people off and may have potentially lost Katherine some podcast points. The Netflix's Duchess star and London-based Canadian comedian is known fairly well for her upfront, in-your-face personality, and many love her for it, while others deem it offensive. So it's safe to say that there was quite a mixed response in negative reviews about her and her podcast, especially after Katherine discussed her character in the show, which she writes, stars in, and executively produces, plus why she adores her self-named life-inspired role so heavily. Katherine described the show's Katherine as being an advocate for women during an interview. Quote, "I love the idea that a woman in any position or situation can find love in an unconventional way and be empowered by that." Throughout the show, Katherine has flipped gender roles with a commitment-phobic woman who constantly puts on the brakes in her relationship with an overly eager and somewhat needy boyfriend, explaining that the story was not meant to be a typical romantic comedy and that women don't need a man to make themselves happy. Where the negative reviews really started to tumble in though was through the show's Katherine and her in-show daughter Olive exploring adoption. Aside from the men comment, Katherine's bold statements in that scene were insulted and put many people on the defense. At number 6, we have season 4 Love Island winner Dani Dye and her famous father, Dani Dye. Dani's father has been entangled in a number of scandals in his time, majority of which has exposed his repeated infidelity against the mother of his children, with one reportedly involving his night spent with a 21-year-old student. The backlash from this alone had put Dad Dani on Hollywood's unofficial hit list, especially after he confessed to his many sins. So I'm sure you'd be the least bit surprised to know that the response for the daddy-daughter duo podcast podcast was all over the place. Despite there being no official reports of their podcast currently tanking, I also wasn't able to find any great ones either. So surely this means it's not all that memorable? Feel free to let me know what you think though. At number 5, we have problematic podcaster Jimmie Lee. Now this next one isn't specifically about his series, as he does have many, but actually over his behavior during his feature in Ethan and Hilla's H3 podcast. Jimmie's behavior indicated to many that he was far too disruptive to continue his own multiple owned shows. During H3, Jimmie visibly pissed off the crew by showing up to the set with his own cameraman, despite the podcast already being recorded and live streamed on the host's behalves. Hilla was even forced by the discomfort Jimmie brought with him to ask one of the men to leave because they kept shoving cameras in her face. This prompted an underlying serious statement by Ethan to Jimmie, brushed off in the form of a joke to steer clear of awkwardness. However, one can practically feel the tension through the screen, which makes it pretty hard to enjoy. Despite roasts being asked by the host of Jimmie, many viewers agreed that Jimmie took his too far, often shooting personal digs at Ethan that lacked filter and morals, such as Ethan's tick. Many are stating that this level of disrespect towards Ethan and his significant other is one of the many reasons why Jimmie never needs to be a part of another podcast in any way, shape, or form again. At number 4, we have the AHC podcast host, among other things, Jake Paul. Now, everybody knows this problematic YouTuber because his heavily reported past has been just that. The trouble he created previously deems him unsuitable to host a podcast by the public, though it seems he's trying his best to move forward in a better direction. However, in case you don't know or need a quick refresher, here is a list of his most major controversies. Jake was fired from Disney Channel's Bizaardvark series mid-season following public complaints arising from his neighbors. Jake was once exposed for attempting to scam his younger bunch of followers on several occasions. Apart from his scamming ways, Jake was also under fire for an endless amount of inappropriate comments and videos, including racial slurs and the usage of non-consensual aged kids. Then there was Jake's charge for trespassing in Arizona following a media-circulated video of him at a mall where vandalism and looting was occurring, and his Calabasas COVID-19 pandemic party that racked up mass tension between him and the mayor. Finally, Jake got thrown into the center of fire after the FBI was forced to execute a federal search warrant of his mansion, showing he was experiencing legal troubles on top of everything else. And all reasons deemed by fans as to why Jake should not have a platform nor a podcast. At number 3, we have iconic socialite Paris Hilton, who has fans wondering if she can't keep her life together, how will she make her podcast work? It seemed like Paris got more relatable in one of the worst ways following her promotional video release for her I Am Paris podcast. After being referred to as washed up in the endless bright light of Kim Kardashian, this podcast seemed to be something that was going to push Paris back into her place on top. However, that perfectly poised picture Paris has created for herself publicly shambled as soon as fans noticed that the room she was recording in was full of unorganized clutter and was a complete disaster. Through this more personalized and almost real experience, you think people would be a bit nicer about her space, but the internet went crazy as per usual. Since Paris has been referred to as a quote absolute snob due to all the editing and effects she spent crafting for the video for herself, rather than to conceal the clear view of mess of empty boxes, old half-emptied and full emptied water bottles, clothes strung all over, and what appeared to be a makeup bag tossed off to the side. Clearly the promos for her podcast indicated that fans can be open and honest with her, but I'm just not sure how well she'll take the criticism of her seemingly messy style. At number 2, we have probably the most controversial podcast host on today's list. Joe Rogan has been dubbed as a not-so-great guy according to many and due to a lot. One big example of this was him chatting it up on one of his episodes with the infamous theorist Alex Jones. Alex's eventual punishment was a mandatory fee from a Texas court, as well as his social media accounts being banned from platforms like Apple, YouTube, and Facebook. During their episode, fans were livid as Joe spoke with Alex as if he were an old friend, as they joked about Alex's legal woes alongside comedian Tim Dillon, who was wearing a shirt that referenced an arrest of a former associate of the late SO Jeffrey Epstein. Joe's content that has been referred to as harmful is followed by a wide male audience, including younger males who are still developing their brains in North American high schools. So despite Joe sometimes being on the better side of society, people always revisit his frequently problematic guests on his podcast, as well as Joe's lack of engagement as an interviewer. Listeners have slammed Joe for getting endless free passes because of the position he's in, versus other podcasters who will call out the hurtful and false remarks. According to many, Joe will always be willing to let others' controversial beliefs slide and remain unaddressed because he's more concerned about the entertainment value of his podcast over its journalistic integrity. At At number 1, we have the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. Now, Meghan has finally released her debut podcast after 2 whole years, but people tuning in have had very divided opinions on whether or not the Spotify podcast with an overage of a $30 million worth was worth the wait. The series called Archetypes dives into an unfiltered side of Meghan's life, according to the British royalty. In the very first episode, Meghan spoke with superstar champion tennis player Serena Williams about how horrified she was regarding the events of Harry's nursery catching on fire during their Royal South African tour in 2019, when Harry was only a 4-month-old baby. Thankfully, Harry was with his nanny outside of the room at the time. Still, Meghan held nothing back when she explained how she was later separated from her son because she was being forced to attend a royal engagement. Quote, "Everyone's in tears, everyone's shaken, and what do we have to do? Go out and do another official engagement." Meghan's openness during the first segment of her Unrefined show had many championing her speaking out against women's issues, but others, they were not nearly as impressed. In fact, many took to leaving negative reviews about Meghan's forwardness. Regardless, Meghan revealed her next guest, Mariah Carey, and how they would be discussing the usage of words such as diva. Meghan has had a lineup of other announced appearances on Archetypes, including actress Margaret Cho and author Alison Yarrow, among many others. That concludes today's BTS. Again, I've been your host, Michaela, and I'll see you all again really soon.